The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever, maybe you can send me an email about it later or something, that's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these. And in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal.
Okay.
John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. I would agree that...
Well, that definitely is a contradiction.
Well, it's not a contradiction because, well, I mean, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other.
Sure.
It's not as if Thucydides is... So he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus' life. And they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But
yes.
crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women is disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark and I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they are the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, you know. So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as
well. I'm not. No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument.
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. And the thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the events. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.